sun a lot recently, you know. Weeks of grey sky, finally blue sky, and then we're inside in the dark. Okay, anyway. Right, today I'm going to talk about critical thinking and giving the student's voice. If you have any questions at any point, or you don't understand something, feel free to stop me. And you can ask a question. If you prefer to ask it in Spanish, that's fine. I usually can understand most. And if not, my able assistants will help me. So the first thing, critical thinking. Are you familiar with this as a term?
Yes.
No? Yes? Yeah, so what is critical thinking then? How would you describe it?
I only use National Geographic for the children for 10, 11 years old.
Okay.
And I download on YouTube because they like the nature a lot.
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Anybody familiar with the idea of critical thinking?
I think they are, but they're just not familiar with the term.
Yes.
Like when we talk in class, sometimes we say it's not so important to have the right answer, but to ask ourselves good questions. Remember what we say in class, like, oh, that's a good question, and we discuss things and we say, it doesn't matter, like you can have different answers. The fact of reflecting on a phenomenon is what is important.
Yeah. So the first problem sometimes, I mean, critical thinking, certainly in England it's a big thing. Sometimes it's described as this 21st century skill, that we shouldn't just accept what we read, we need to be thinking carefully about it, asking questions about it, and thinking about how you teach these skills. Okay? And it's been in English language teaching, a lot of people are talking about it as something that we should teach within our English classes. Okay? So we'll go through this one quite quickly. This is a rather complicated explanation of it, but the point is not everybody has the same idea of critical thinking. So this one is, I mean, very often I think critical thinking really kind of means, oh, I'm a critical thinker, but they're not. They don't think the same as me. They're not critical, I am. It's that kind of idea. So you get things like, you know, here it's reasoning abilities. What's interesting about this is not uncritically accepted social rules and taboos. So you are thinking about, we do things in a certain way. Why do we do them in this way? Can we do them in a better way? It's not just accepting norms and rules in the way. And being aware of self-interest and vested interest. Vested interests like intereses escondidas, like you might have, you know, as we will see that I have some here. We shall come back to. Okay. Whereas this one, it's from a website. What's interesting I like about this one, critical thinking is one of the most sought after qualities that employers look for in a job. So it's basically here, it's just about, critical thinking is being about doing your job better and not the manager not needing to look over your shoulder and check on you. That's a very different view to the other one, which is more about being a citizen, a socially responsible person who might actually criticise their boss rather than just accept what they're being told. So what are the kind of skills? So here these were 5. These were actually from the one about the job. But the critical skills, analysis, being able to analyse things, communication, creativity, open-mindedness, being free about understanding other people's points of view, I suppose, problem-solving skills. So, first activity, because we're EFL teachers, you see. Which would you, just with the person next to you, can you put these 5 skills in order of importance. What is the most important and the least important? Okay? Just with the person next to you, 2s or 3s, discuss.
Al 50% de esas clases, entiendes las clases, sí, eso sí. Lo que no es critical thinking skills.
Not there. So over here, what was your top one?
First, open-mindedness.
Open-mindedness. Anybody else have open-mindedness as their top one? Yeah. Okay. Why do you think open-mindedness? Why did you go for that? I'll try.
Because it's very difficult that the people can open your mind. Open your mind. Yes, it's very difficult for me.
Okay, so it's difficult to see from other people's perspective, we could say. Okay, so often, you know, we're very stuck in the way we see things, and looking from other people's point of view is quite difficult. Now, if I was in a class, okay, I would write this on the board, and I would give you these phrases, but we don't have a board, so right here. Okay, and I think also when I heard you discussing that sometimes the open-mindedness is the kind of basis for other things. So in order to be good at communication, it's important to be open-minded and see other points of view. Okay. It's one possible. What did you go for? What was your top one?
In my opinion, communication.
Communication. Okay. Why was that communication?
Because it's the first step
The first step.
for contact.
Okay. Okay. So it's it's the first impression you give. It's the first moment that you are engaging with other people.
That's why communication is
Okay. There is no right answer, obviously. The first thing is, you know, this is basically a critical thing. I mean, it's the same kind of task that we've done in ELT materials for 50 years. I mean, it's nothing particularly new, but it is a kind of critical thinking task. We're thinking about priorities, order, we're communicating. The issue for us as teachers is basically what happened between us. The student may be looking for the words to express themselves. As teachers, we want to be helping them provide those words. Okay? You could do this with other things. The other side of it, I think, is it's important in a way not as a teacher to give an answer. I mean, the whole point of critical thinking, in a way, is to have other people's perspectives. So, and what you will have found, I mean, interestingly, right at the front here, which was my next question, actually, I think, was, should we teach, I mean, which is the most important as a teacher? So maybe, if you give different roles, so if you're a businessman, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, what would be the order? So if we're looking to develop open-mindedness, other people's perspectives, one simple little task you could do is when we have any of these types of discussion in a book, you could just ask the students to think about their answers from a different point of view. Yeah, give them a role to think about it from that way. Okay. We could just give them questions like these, which are kind of critical thinking questions, I suppose. Should we teach these skills at all in an English class? Why? Why not? Which is the most important skill in an English class, as opposed to generally? What's the best way to teach skills in general? What's the best way to teach these thinking skills? So what's the best way to teach a reading skill, listening skill? What about, is it different to the way you teach a thinking skill? Why might an ELT book, an English language teacher book, have a critical thinking box? So this is in perspectives. We have, let me just find it. So there's a page here. They do the reading, and then they get to this bit, and it goes, look, there's a little box, and it says critical thinking skills, in this case, evaluating ideas. And there's a little box there. Why? Why do you think that's there? Okay, as a teacher. How might it help? What might be bad about it? So again, these are just normal kind of questions we often ask in the class. They are kind of critical thinking questions. I think actually sometimes we don't ask enough about what's bad. A lot of English language material these days is very focused on being happy and good, and avoids talking about bad things. We could add that as a question for ourselves. How far are the practices as a teacher reinforcing or contradicting critical thinking skills for our best interest? So, again, just with a person next to you. Questions have disappeared. Okay. Can you, with your partners, just start answering some of these questions? We might not get to the end. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes, so we probably won't get to the end. But we're going to look at some of these questions in a moment as well. So just discuss with the person next to you. Go.
I try to do the students I try to make the students think about the subjects as always,
So these 3 skills.
we are different than the other.
So these are the skills we're thinking of. Teachers will
With adults, when you have things that are in Esto normalmente
Trying to record the
there are techniques to follow to calculate a structure or something. It's not a really
Alright, okay. Your children, how old are they?
I try to put them in the way
This is probably going to be a bit for older children.
Yes, for example, in mathematics, it's difficult to introduce
what does critical thinking involve? So here we are, that's where we're at, okay.
Not replace 100% of the content.
But you do teach them interpretation. You do sort of give them puzzles sometimes to see how they Why am I? The last question. Why am I giving this talk? Why am I doing this?
Stop! Okay, stop there. Thank you. And once you get going, okay. I'm sure you didn't finish all of them. No problem. This is also something as a teacher, my preference is better to stop before everybody's finished. Stop when everybody's still enjoying themselves. Is what I get. So basically, I'm not going to ask your questions, answers at this point. We're going to be talking about these questions for the rest of the talk. Okay, working backwards. Okay, so we shall end with this one. Okay, but if you have comments, questions, stop me. Ask, say something. Okay. So the first thing was this thing about vested interest. So often one of the key ideas of a critical thinker is understanding in a way what you don't see and how that might influence what happens. Okay. So I mean, as a little kind of task, this one. Okay, this is actually from our upper intermediate level of this book. We often have these photos at the beginning of the book, beginning of each unit. We have these photos. We ask some questions. This one's quite interesting. What's not, or who is not in the photo? Any thoughts on that? Who is not in the photo?
People he's talking to?
People he's talking to, yeah. Anybody else?
Together but alone.
Pardon?
They are together but they are alone.
Yeah, so there's a kind of everybody's in their little bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah, just talking on their phones and everybody's focused on that thing. Any particular kind of person who is not there?
Hippie?
Hippies, yeah. Women.
Okay.
Not one woman in this photo.
It's possible.
Why do you think that is? What?
No?
That one
No.
there. So basically this is we have a little question on that. Why are there no women in the photo?
Because they're more intelligent to be there.
Maybe. Yeah, exactly. They've got more.
I think this is very stressing.
Exactly. It's a very stressful job. They have more sense than. Maybe they have different priorities. Okay. Any other suggestions why that might not be there? Any other thoughts? Okay. I mean, it's a discussion that we have, and then what we follow it up with is a discussion which is quite live in Britain. I don't know about here. Women aren't in the top jobs. There's a kind of what we call a glass ceiling. So it's basically they get to a certain level and nobody's above this level. But you can't see the barrier. This is why it's called a glass ceiling. Do you use the same word in Cristal.
Techo.
Because if they were in that class ceiling, they probably changed many things, and one of the things I think they could change is maybe this.
Yes, exactly. So maybe they would bring a different perspective.
Yeah, making the life simpler.
Okay. Yeah. So they might bring a more reasonable approach to work.
Yeah, work-life balance.
Better work-life balance. These kinds of things. So there are. I mean, lots of photos are available like this. There's another. Should have put it in, but there's a. I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's another picture. Actually. One of my favourites. This is, you can see that. It's an interesting one because of a different perspective.
Move it away from the light.
That's it, yeah.
I should have put it on the thing. It's basically the pyramids.
Yeah.
The pyramids. It's Egypt. So this is the shadow
Projecting.
projected. So, why do we never see this? as a image.
Because
You know.
we see the pyramids.
We see the pyramids, and what else do we see usually?
Camels.
Camels, deserts, you know, maybe a palm tree, no
We don't
people.
see the
It's you know, there's a slightly different perspective, and you can have a discussion about,
That's true.
you know, whether when you go and see places, do they match the expectations that you have? Why are they different? You know, you can use those kinds of questions, those kinds of photos, just to ask some questions along these things. And what they produce are often the kinds of interesting conversation. They're just a bit more, yeah, sometimes a bit. I mean, it's not to say we should never to say what's your favourite fruit or you know, your favourite colour or whatever. These are questions and conversations that we have as well. But a lot of our lives are full of these kinds of debate, and without a kind of perspective of critical thinking, I think sometimes they don't get asked in material or in a classroom. So you know, we can make use of those. Yes, vested interests. So these hidden interests. Of course, my hidden interest, not so hidden anymore, is that I am selling books. Okay, there's no question about that. I'm a representative of National Geographic learning, bringing the classroom to the world. But I'm also a writer, and that's not quite the same thing, because some of the things I like to write about, the publisher doesn't like me to. I'm also a trainer. I do teacher training, so I run a summer school doing teacher training courses, writing material. I've written a kind of methodology book. And again, that doesn't always fit. The way I think about teaching doesn't always fit with the traditional mode of teaching. I am a teacher myself, so I teach normal language classes again in the summer. And I'm also a language student, so I speak Spanish after a fashion, and I've tried learning Russian rather badly of late. Some of these things bring different perspectives, and they're not always running in the same direction. So I think often, certainly in some areas of English language teaching, they say, oh, course books, they're useless, they're making my life difficult, they don't have real life in them, they're not good. Sometimes that is true, and I wouldn't deny that. But the fact that you are using a course book doesn't stop you having these other perspectives and these other ways. So I just would like to keep that as an open mind, if you like. And I think you should also think about your own vested interests as a teacher. Okay? What is it that what are the hidden prejudices that you have? Now, of course, not us teachers, not us. These are the uncritical thinking teachers. They might have their interests being prepare as little as possible. Keep my life to a minimum, my working life to a minimum. Others might say, being the boss is what's important in my class. Keeping control, not letting the students, too much freedom, or answering back, or anything like that. Avoiding embarrassment. I don't want to put myself in a situation where I don't know the answer, for example, or the student might make me look a little bit foolish. Maybe even in some cases the student knows more than me. Could be, avoid this. Keep your challenge. Deliver exam results. In England now, people are paid higher, in fact, on their exam results.
What does it mean? Deliver exam results.
So, I as a teacher, I've got my English class.
Yeah.
In England, they do an exam at 16, so the equivalent of ESOL. In England, it's a national exam. It's not an internal student one, school one. So basically, if my students fail, or I don't get a certain percentage who pass, I don't get my higher pay next year.
Wow.
Yeah. So that obviously has an impact, and there have been instances of. I know this is much bigger thing. It's not quite as clear cut as that in England. So your exam results are part of what you put forward to show that you're a good teacher. In the States, it's very much based on that, and they have had examples of people cheating because they need to get the higher exam results. And they're having a Britain as well.
But that means that you prepare your students for the test.
So exactly. So the impact on this, what I would suggest is, of all of these, actually, are kind of against critical thinking.
Yeah.
They're a kind of contrary. They're against. They're not following an idea of critical thinking. So, the person who doesn't want to prepare very much, they often go for a book, and I've heard this said. Actually, I've heard it said in my own books, but I kind of feel uncomfortable about it. They say, "Oh, it teaches itself." So I can go in, pick up the book, page number 1, do exercise. Here are the answers. Page number 2, answers. 3 answers. Job done. Go home. Okay? It teaches itself. It seems that everything is under control, students have learned something, well, they've got the answers. I would say that that is not encouraging critical thinking. It's not evaluating what they've done, it's not assessing, it's not communicating often, it's not particularly communicative. The idea of avoiding embarrassment, so there should only be one answer. So a big thing in publishing is that when you have an exercise, the teacher should be able to look in the teacher's book for the answer. So that the student says da 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 da, teacher can go da 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 da, correct. Okay, but that has its place. Again, it's not that these things are bad completely. Teaching itself means it's clear and forward, has a clear structure. One answer that it's, that it's doable. But the problem is that one answer is not critical thinking. Critical thinking is divergent answers. There are many different possibilities to a thing. The answer, there is no one answer to that listing exercise we did at the beginning. And so there's an avoidance of what I call divergence. So we have convergent, the same, would be the same in the teaching. That rather than language going like this, it's all focused on one thing. And in terms of speaking, that means maybe not having challenging questions because the students might not be able to have the words to give their answers. But maybe they do have some words which can get some way towards their answers, plus they have their own language. And, for me, an important part of any kind of critical thinking and any language class is the students should be able to use their own language. So that the point is, when they try, they don't have the words, we encourage them. Can you say it in English? If they can't, what do you want to say in Spanish? Da 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 da. Okay, yeah. This is how we say that in English.
Perfect, yeah.
Da-da-da-da. Have a go. Say it yourself. Practice it again. Okay? We're going to do the same task now with a different partner. Okay? Try again. Do it in English so they can make some use of the language which we've elicited from them. It's come from them. It's what they wanted to say. And this is the key thing of I think both critical thinking and language teaching is we're there to give the students a voice. And the way we do that is listening to what they're trying to say and help them to say it. Obviously, can it be tested? What's in the test is what you were talking about. It all becomes about the test, which is only about one answer. It's not a general idea of education. Most tests, and increasingly, are not, certainly in English language teaching, are becoming more closed. So there's a lot of emphasis on these computer tested ones, where there's not too much dimension. And this is interesting. We were having a discussion just before about technology and how technology is introducing in education, how it's going to change the way we teach. For me, actually, if you look at in English language teaching anyway, most technology is very, very old-fashioned. It's words, translation, test the translation of the word. Here's a grammar test, gap, test, got it wrong, do a different one, gap, test, do a different one, gap, test. Yes, maybe if you got that one wrong, you need to do a different type of grammar. But it's basically a kind of very narrow, one item by item type of testing. And actually for me, for teachers, if we are going to beat technology, if we are going to be relevant in our classrooms, the thing we can do best is listen to our students, see what they're trying to say, help them say what they're trying to say, which is often quite unexpected, and do our best to give it. Now, as a non-native speaker teacher, I know that is difficult sometimes. I mean, I've tried teaching Spanish sometimes, and you feel even things which you know are correct, sometimes you suddenly think, oh, is it correct? But I think you have to just trust yourself and just realise that whatever you are giving them is better than what the student was trying to say. If you really think you can't produce something better than the student was trying to say, then just ignore it and just say, well done, let's move on. But that is the idea. Correctness is one of the taboos and social norms in English language teaching that perhaps we should be questioning. Okay? So, this brings us to the box. Okay? So we have these boxes where we teach a critical thinking skill. In this case, evaluating ideas, supporting arguments. So here the box says, evaluating ideas and judging them against other perspectives helps to form a basis for developing your own point of view. Okay, another one is supporting arguments. Sometimes writers select information to support their point of view. Okay, so again, just in pairs, just quickly, can you think of any ways you might, in English, ideally in an English language setting, but in your own Spanish setting, if you like, how you might develop these skills? What might you do to develop evaluating ideas? How do you get students to evaluate ideas? Judge them against other perspectives. How do we get students to notice what arguments are used to support? Okay, just briefly with the person next to you. They will be very simple. I mean, our solution is very simple, so don't look for anything too complicated. Any thoughts?
And think about other people's ideas.
I think
You take an example like migration, for example. Very quickly get photos, different comments,
yeah, sometimes I remember
different perspectives of seeing why they're trying to get in, what the people in seeing and how they see them, get to understand gap,
I can
space
feel that they are afraid to
between
contradict
one
me.
set of ideas and another
No, but
set
at the
of
beginning,
ideas.
now you know me, we're friends.
Immigration is such
At the
a
beginning, people kind of say,
sensitive
like say
issue.
something. Now you know the game. Take the eye.
You know, teaching geography, for example, you say, such a sensitive Spanish population,
No, she's saying this, but I can say
30%, 40%. They have this idea that there's this huge number of immigrants. And that's just about
all right.
So yeah, don't give them the try to give them something real a lot of the time, so that they can relate to it, and that will hopefully stimulate things like huge role playing things we're talking about
Okay. Alright. Stop there. Anything like to brave enough to suggest some thoughts? Yeah. Apparently you've been volunteered. You have a good idea apparently. Tell us. It's like anything we've seen that. Go on.
We thought about
Moral dilemmas. Yeah.
by using them, we can develop the critical thinking of the students.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, kind of moral dilemmas, debates. Somebody else was mentioning. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. And where would the evaluating ideas come into that? Any thoughts?
They're looking at different perspectives.
Okay. Yeah.
And empathy and how
Yeah.
they would react.
Exactly. So we might have, you might give a few. I mean, in terms of helping students, particularly in a situation where they don't have much language, you might need to give some. I mean, this is kind of against the idea because you're giving, but we need maybe a couple to get going as a starting point to decide, whether these are good ideas or bad ideas, and then thinking some more of their own, perhaps. So I think that model of, 4, 5 plus 2, or 4 plus 4, give something, then see if you can think of some other ones, is not a bad approach. Any other thoughts on either the supporting or the evaluating ideas?
Yeah, I'm going to say it. Because it was an interesting observation. One of my teachers here said that sometimes I, as a teacher, when I'm with them, I go too strong on my choice of debate topics, like topics from debate. that I started this year with Catalonia.
Right.
They were all kind of taken aback and saying, no, we want to know your opinion now first. And, but now they're beginning to get the game, and they know that I might be saying one thing, but then you never know what she's thinking eventually, because she might say one thing one day, another thing
I
another day.
think this is a really, really important thing. Many years ago I did a talk about, it was called Taboo or Not Taboo. That is the question. So the question, the point for me is sometimes is to avoid having a lesson which is a debate. So if you kind of say, right, today we're talking about Catalonia, you are going to be for, you are going to be against. Now, in some ways, this is a good thing to do because you're maybe forcing some people to have a different perspective, take on other arguments. This is a good thing. But sometimes it kind of, the whole lesson becomes about that, and it either fails or succeeds on that one thing. Whereas often you can just have one question amongst 5. So you do your reading or listening or something, you know, what's in the news at the moment. You can have one question, you know, will the Spanish win the World Cup? One question about something else, and then one question about Catalonia. It's like, if they go for that and want to talk about it, it becomes more of a, it gives them that option, but it's not forcing them all the time into having those different views.
Yeah.
So you're giving them a little bit of space, rather than always kind of throwing it. The other thing is, from a being aware of our own power, is this thing of, are we teaching them my critical thinking skills or their own? So it's trying to, it's very difficult. It's a very fine balance, because obviously if we hear fascist or you know, very dubious racist opinions, we need to challenge those. But you know, at the same time, there is room for different. It's tricky.
In my opinion, when we have a topic like this,
Yes.
Catalonia, the overall thinking, everybody has an opinion, but
Yeah.
at the end, all I got is that I probably learn more new vocabulary,
Yes.
new structures to talk to, and I got my opinion, but
Yeah, your opinion
doesn't matter,
hasn't. Yeah.
doesn't matter if someone else has another opinion. If we talk in Spanish, we know we will have different opinions.
Yes.
We know that.
Yeah.
But at the end, as when I trying to learn some new language, for me the most important thing is that I learn a new vocabulary.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the thing I got home.
Yes. Yeah. And absolutely. And I think this is it. This is why it's important to have these questions. It is important to have those types of questions in the class, because it is the thing. I mean, if you go to Spain, you go to England, just as when I come to Spain, more or less the first question anybody asks is about Brexit these days.
Yes.
The same when you go to England, they'll be asking about Catalonia. So you need to be able to express yourself about those views, and you will not, quite probably won't have the language from doing a normal course book, because those things are just not taught there. So there is a kind of, there's a need for us as teachers to be able to provide that, and managing it, having those conversations, but treating it, perhaps the lesson for us as teachers is to be treating it as language lesson, as when we're the teachers, in a way we have to be totally impartial, provide the language for the people we disagree with and the people we agree with. And this is, you know, the critical thinking is as much about us and our own approach as the students. So, I mean, here, these ones come from after reading. Okay, so they tend to deal with the reading, which is the most important reason the author gives for the decline in hitchhiking. It's about hitchhiking. Okay, but as for any text, pretty much, which has got any kind of opinion for it, we could ask, which is the most important reason the author gives for, this is an evaluating question, it's just a frame that we could ask for any text, even if the course book doesn't. In this case, there's a comparison the author provides for a website. Okay, you might find other comparisons in a text. We could ask, rather than just dealing with it as grammar, a comparison, we could ask, is it a good comparison? You know, why not? How is the example of hitchhiker different from other kinds? So again, they may give several examples in a text to support an argument. And this is one of the things we'll be looking at, is we end up crossing over a little bit. So there may be several supporting arguments. We might say, you know, are they all the same actually? You know, is there a difference? These are difficult questions, they're challenging. I don't expect all students to have a huge amount to say about it. But I think skills, it's not really you're teaching the skill, you're giving the opportunity. to practice, and practice makes perfect in the end. You know, skills actually develop mainly through the doing, not through the telling. I think this is just something to beware of boxes in any book. Okay? So, you know, why do we have a box? Why is there a critical language box there? Well, the first thing is other books don't have a critical thinking box. It's what we call a unique selling point. Okay? It's telling you this is what makes our book different. Yes, we've all got present perfect and present continuous, but we have critical thinking. Okay? So, there's a marketing element to it. As a writer, sometimes it's useful because if you want to do something different, you can point to the teacher, this is slightly different to what you maybe saw before, and this is the reason we're doing it. So it can be a good thing. But I think more important is to think about what is bad about it. And the biggest thing is that it turns it into grammar. What do I mean by that? First, when you have a box, it's an explanation. It's learning about rather than doing it. Okay? And the bigger the box, the more they're learning about and the less they're doing usually. Okay? So that is a problem, you know. And in terms of our teaching grammar, long explanations, I suggest, are a waste of time. As little as possible is best. The second thing is in terms of a publisher and in terms of teachers, because teachers respond to what, publishers respond to what teachers say, there should be one every unit. So you can't do a critical thinking in 2 units and then have 1 unit where you don't do it, and then another unit where you do. No, they must be all the same. They must all have a critical unit then, which is slightly mad in my mind, because you know sometimes there's nothing to say about it. You know, maybe if you're doing a review of a, I don't know, your latest music or review or something, or talking about your hobbies, there's maybe no critical thinking to be thought about. You know, it's just some fun exchange. But that's the way it goes. That's what I have. It's only about one thing. So we have a grammar box, which is about the present continuous, and then all exercises connected with that box must only be about the present continuous. There must be no examples of a present perfect, or a conditional, or any other language which might be used with a present continuous. Is that how language works?
No.
No.
And that's why I like outcomes, because it's
You can zoom in there as part of our marketing technique. Yeah, I mean, basically, you know, language interacts with each other. So, you know, we might have, yes, we can have a little focus on one structure, but for me, it's got to be the speaking and everything else should be divergent. It should be allowing space for them to use any structure and language at some point, even though they may get it wrong, probably. No repetitions. So in your book, you will have your unit on present perfect, and then there will be no other units on present perfect, usually, until the next level, when it will come maybe in the same units, equivalent unit, or a bit later perhaps. Why? I mean, isn't all language learning and all skills learning essentially repetition? Mm-hmm. So why do we only have one unit on present perfect? I mean, obviously, in reality, the book should be giving opportunities for speaking which allow for more than that. And most books do, to be fair, on these things. But some more than others.
some more than others, yes.
And then perhaps the worst part of it is done the box, done the teaching and learning. You know, we've done. How many times have you had that comment? Oh, they've done past simple.
Oh, yeah.
Now we're on to past continuous. We don't need to do any more on the past simple.
Done it on the look.
Okay. So this is the kind of, I suppose, I mean, this is what happens in the book. So in our particular book, we have 10 units, so we have 10 critical thinking boxes. My point through the whole thing, hopefully you will realise, is that the box is only the smallest part. That actually, if you want to develop these skills, you have to do them over and over again and give them repeated opportunities. So, I mean, basically, ignore the writer's perspective and all this. Think about the last one as methodology. Skills in language basically come from practicing the same thing, ideally in different contexts. It comes over time. So it's not just practicing it all in one go or all in one unit. It has to go into the next unit and the next unit and the unit after that. Or at least have opportunities. And the box, or our explanation, whether it's vocabulary, grammar, or critical thinking skills, is the smallest part and should be dealt with as quickly as possible so that we can actually do the thing that we're trying to do. But that does mean a little bit of critical thinking about our own practice and our own writing and our own course books. But you know, some of these aren't going to change quickly. So for me, what is the most important critical thinking skill in English class? Anybody suggest their one? I went for communication and language because it's an English class. Okay, but of course that is my opinion. you can agree or disagree. Other options are available. So just in terms of that, if we're thinking beyond these boxes and thinking more generally about critical thinking, I think you can think about communication, language for critical thinking about language, critical thinking tasks that generate unknown language, and repeated encounters and interacted ones. And that's what we're going to look at in the rest of the run. So first, okay, just a little brief moment with the person next to you. So, if you were trying to teach some language to help them be critical thinkers, for example, to challenge stereotypes that we had earlier, the racist views perhaps, what language would the student need to be able to, what would they say? Somebody said a racist comment or some kind of stereotype of Spanish people or British people. What would you say in reply? How would you challenge that? What would be the language you would need? If you were doing some research, if you were doing this, evaluating some ideas, what language do you need to be able to evaluate those ideas in English? And one, just at a beginner level, what language could we teach them to be able to express their opinions? Okay, just those three. Have a quick thought for the person next to you.
Well, questions, aren't they? I mean, the language you're teaching, so if there's someone says what language do you give the students to challenge? Presumably it's questions like, why do you say that? Or how can you justify that? What makes you think that? Yeah, and then you go into
But that is the most Things that you might want to say, so the words that you might use.
Words, phrases,
Behavior or racist, xenophobic, or class conscious.
Okay, stop. We're running a bit late actually, so I should carry on. Okay, stop. We'll have a look at some items.
Yeah, but
That's
So,
the level. That's the level.
Here we go.
that you don't see.
Here's one thought. This is something I wrote in a book like 15 years ago. It's one of my favourite phrases that I teach. Just because doesn't mean, so just because I'm British doesn't mean I have tea I like the Queen. For example. Just because I'm Spanish doesn't mean I know how to dance flamenco. These kinds of things. It's such a generative, it's actually quite an interesting, just a lesson in itself. Thinking about different ways you can finish this sentence. You could give them just because I'm a woman, just because I'm a man, just because, and they finish these sentences.
Yeah.
It's just as an exercise in itself, as like a 15-minute, 20-minute thing. It's quite interesting. And that is the language of challenging a stereotype. I mean, obviously there's all other things like that's a bit racist, isn't it? Or, that's a bit of an overgeneralisation. That's a bit of a stereotype. We could teach this kind of language as well. But if we don't teach those language, where are they getting it? They'll surely manage, I'm sure, but we could help them with that. Similarly, we can have this identify. We mentioned before about looking from different perspectives. Well, to do that, you need to teach them as a teacher, as a parent, as a teenager. I think. So we very often teach these. I'm in favour, I'm against, I'm for, I think, I like, etc. But I actually don't think I've ever seen in a book taught as a
No.
It's interesting.
It's peculiar. Why is that? I think you have to think about what you need to do to be able to think of that as a language. We just accept. Often a lot of what is taught in books is basically what was taught in the last book. I mean, literally, if you go to a publisher, the first thing they give you, the first thing they do is look at every other book and make sure all the grammar that is in every other book is also in this book.
Yeah.
And often the same topics as well. So that they're covering the same. It's not good, I think. Okay, and then obviously there's a practice to go with this. You won't be able to see this. This is from an advanced book. It's about statistics, but it's got things like the research is fundamentally flawed. The sample group, so the number of people in the group they studied was too small. It was self-selected, meaning they chose themselves. So interestingly, for example, I know there's, you'll be familiar with CLIL. So a lot of studies on CLIL are very favourable. But actually a lot of those studies are self-selected. So it means that the students who are studied have been chosen because they are the best students.
Yeah.
Or they've chosen themselves to join that group, which immediately makes the study flawed, not possibly correct. So you need that language to be able to talk about whether the studies you're looking at are useful. So anybody who's studying like science, any kind of science or social studies, social science, anybody who has to do research in a way needs that language to be able to be a critical thinker. I mean, obviously they can do it in their own language, but in English.
Well, it's interesting, Andrew, that because what you were showing before, that's scaffolding. You know this idea of andamiachi and Walkley and Cleel.
Yeah.
That really is coming from the bilingual teaching sometimes.
Yeah.
Those ideas.
Yeah.
That hasn't reached into the English classroom,
No.
English language classroom.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, exactly. Yeah. There can be these both ways. I mean, I have doubts sometimes about Cleel, as I mentioned before, but I think there are a lot of good things which come from it. And one of the, in a way, the whole thinking about other topics, thinking about what's possible in an English language class to talk about, is coming from this Cleel thrust, I think, which I think is really a good thing, and especially in like secondary, because in a way, kids, they often don't want to talk so much about their personal lives actually in a classroom with a teacher. So sometimes these other topics are quite good to be looking at. This is just the beginner. Again, you probably won't be able to see this, but it's kind of, it's an elementary class, but we learn, okay, all of these words: better water, better Wi-Fi, better library, more schools, new museum, new stadium. They are all very basic words, okay? All we ask them to do is, are any of these things happening in your city? So do you want better Wi-Fi or a new airport or not? This is the initial debate. They can just say yes or no. We can ask the students why. They won't have the language. They might kind of say, gas, or something like that, pollution. And it's the same word. There's too much pollution. And so we can use that to then give. So the first way to give lower level students critical thinking language is to give them the opportunity to think critically and give their opinions, which is very, very rare in any elementary course, where they're basically, I'm not English, Hugh Grant isn't German, that kind of stuff, you know, so much of it is like that. Okay? And we then teach things like, it's going to save time, provide a useful service, improve education, help businesses, cause a lot of noise and pollution. Now, those words are high level in terms of some descriptions. In terms of frequency in the language, the word cause, for example, and problem are probably, they're about, I think it's about, cause I think is about 300 times per million words you will hear cause. As a comparison, the word banana you will hear about 9 times. So it's about 30 times more commonly used cause than banana. We might take that as supporting evidence, as critical thinkers, that maybe it's more useful to teach the word cause earlier than the word banana. Or at least start thinking about other words which we could teach which may be of more frequency and more use at a low level. Because they will see them more often, therefore they'll learn them a bit quicker, etc. Critical thinking about language. Okay, I'm going to pass that on because a bit short of time. It's basically, you can have a look at this as an example. They have this from perspectives. They have some words to talk about starting a new business. So invent something new, raise money from investors, negotiate with suppliers to get the best deal, find partners to distribute the product in different countries. They're business words about starting a business. So if we're thinking of practicing this language and kind of practicing the critical thinking skill, analysis, communication, creativity, open-mindedness, problem-solving skills, any ideas how we could practice both Any thoughts? Very briefly. Go on again, with the person next to you. Just have a little think. 1 or 2 minutes.
The exercise
Now this language we want to know
how can you combine
with some of these skills.
Yeah, that's a difficult one for school children. Stuff something different.
you analyze the you read the
Sweet shop. Where's the place around here? Somewhere near the school, because there's not much Okay.
So you are
Stop there. Any thoughts? Any suggestions?
So what is it?
I heard, stop there. So I heard one which maybe frontier we have thinking which is the first problem you will encounter setting up your own business. So, you know, deciding the priority, almost putting them in order of when you will encounter these issues. You know. I think over here I also heard one which was which is the most difficult or which is the most important skill to have. It's basically ranking in the similar way that we did at the beginning with the skills themselves. Any other thoughts? In another exercise, actually it's after one of the videos that we have, we asked them to consider how they would do these things. So how would you go about raising money from investors? How would you do that? What would you need to do to be able to raise the money? So taking that one step further and thinking about the practical problems involved. Okay? I think in this one it's decide the 3 most important skills. Can you think of any others? So is that principle of, we've given them some, but maybe there are other ones which we could think of. Explaining your choices. It's not difficult. It's not a kind of magical new thing, but it's involving those skills. It being conscious of trying to teach these skills as well as the language maybe produces slightly different tasks sometimes. We can do something similar actually just by asking about language questions which are divergent and will give different possible answers. So rather than just saying what's the opposite of light, we could ask what's the opposite of light bag, a light workload. I mean, in a way they're heavy in both cases. What's the opposite of leaving halfway through? Any suggestions? Stay. Stay for the whole thing, yeah. Sometimes people say, stay to the bitter end. But hopefully that's not the case for you. At least it's not bitter. Staying to the end is good, but not... So we can ask those kind of questions. Okay, I'm afraid we're out of time. I've over planned or under. I'm just going to very quickly go through these, what we do. So you have this idea of creativity as a skill.
So Andrew, that clock is wrong.
Oh right, okay. What time
it's in fact 20 minutes past 6.
And what time should I be finishing?
Well, another 10 minutes or so you've got, yeah.
So the idea
20.
is, we have this idea of creativity. We can have a little box, we could tell people about creativity. But how might you practice these over a period of time with different tasks? What would you teach? What other skills would they need? Okay, I'm not going to ask you to discuss this particular one, just give you some examples. So the first thing is we ask in our particular book, this is the selling bit, you can kind of go, what do you think it means to be creative? Do you think creativity is only connected to the arts? So, you know, there's a tendency to have, you know, norms that we kind of associate things with. How important is it? Yeah, just general questions around the idea of creativity to get them thinking. They then read, obviously you don't, I'm not expecting you to read this, it's a text about tests of creativity. Okay, so it presents some ways that creativity has been assessed. Okay, so it gives them a kind of model of creativity. But because we're critical thinkers, we then give them some facts and opinions. So there's a bit of a kind of discussion about what's the difference between fact and opinion. But then we give them these facts and opinion, and they evaluate whether these are supportive of creative tests or not. So we're giving them different perspectives as well. So yes, we're doing one skill, but we're also doing another. So it's the idea that you're trying to, you know, in a way it's almost impossible to to separate these skills, and we don't try. So. And then they have, my perspective bit, they basically ask the same questions, so they re-look at these same questions and see if they've changed their opinions in any way. So kind of re-evaluation of what. We have a video. This is the TED video. I'll show you the first little bit. Okay, it's because it's 7 minutes long, we don't have time, and get an idea of what connection it has with creativity. So here's your little question: what connection with creativity does it have? Here we go.
I make dictionaries, and my job as a lexicographer is to try to put all the words possible into the dictionary. My job is not to decide what a word is. That is your job. Everybody who speaks English decides together what's a word and what's not a word. Every language is just a group of people who agree to understand each other. Now, sometimes when people are trying to decide whether a word is good or bad, they don't really have a good reason, so they say something like, because grammar. And I don't actually really care about grammar too much, don't tell anybody. But the word grammar, actually, there are two kinds of grammar. There's the kind of grammar that kind of lives inside your brain, and if you're a native speaker of a language or a good speaker of a language, it's the unconscious rules that you follow when you speak that language. And this is what you learn when you learn a language as a child. And here's an example. This is a wug, right? It's a wug. Now there is another one. There are two of these. There are two. Exactly. You know how to make the plural of wugs. That rule lives in your brain. You never had to be taught this rule. You just understand it. This is an experiment that was invented by a professor at Boston College named Jean Berko Gleason back in 1958. So we've been talking about this for a long time. Now, these kinds of natural rules that exist in your brain, they're not like traffic laws. They're more like laws of nature. And nobody has to remind you to obey a law of nature, right? When you leave the house in the morning, your mom doesn't say, hey, honey, I think it's going to be cold. Take a hoodie. Don't forget to obey the law of gravity, right? Nobody says this. Now, there are other rules that are more about manners than they are about nature. So you can think of like, a word is like a hat. Once you know how hats work, nobody has to tell you, don't wear hats on your feet. What they have to tell you is, can you wear hats inside? Who gets to wear a hat? What are the kinds of hats you get to wear, right? Those are more of the second kind of grammar, which linguists often call usage. as opposed to grammar.
Okay. She goes on to discuss how new words come into the language. So kind of how new words are created. So the connection there is basically, there's these two things basically. There's the idea of how one creates new words, and she actually, interestingly, kind of gives rules for creativity. So there are rules that we can put words together, we can use a word which exists already and make it something new. And actually these are the same rules which often inventors use when they're inventing products actually. So there's a kind of, there is something about teaching something about the skill through the video as well. Okay? I should say that the material that goes with these videos gives a lot of support for the students. There's a lot on the page to help them understand the content. It's not what we just did where you just play it. Okay?
Now,
so this is followed by a little kind of discussion. Yeah, we asked them to think about how new words are made in their own language, other new words which have appeared. So they're kind of putting the practice in a way to their own language. But we also think it's a kind of different perspectives. So why do these people invent new words? Poets, politicians, scientists and teenagers. Because they all do, don't they? But the reasons are quite different, I think. Or maybe they're the same. Maybe they're all to avoid other people knowing what we're talking about. No. Surely not in the case of poets. They want us to understand. But it's that seeing it from a different perspective. So it's another critical thinking skill applied to creativity in this case. And then the last one, during the final speaking task, I'll just explain this. Basically, they put into practice some of the ideas of the creativity that they'd read about, which is the idea that you first have to be divergent. You think of as many possible solutions as you can. But the other side of creativity is then the problem solving convergent, being able to understand what is actually possible. So you create. This is the thing which we generally think of creativity. Oh wow, it's got amazing creativity. You can think of thousands of different possibilities. But actually that's useless if you then can't put it into some kind of practice and select the ones which will work for the situation. So basically they're given some scenarios which we don't see here, but in the book. And first they think of as many solutions as possible, and then we get them to think of one which might work and reasons why it might work. So again, supporting evidence, those kinds of things. So, as a kind of final thing then, should we teach critical thinking skills at all in an English class, which is the question I asked at the beginning? From my perspective, and I have to say I've changed my mind, I often say, it's just about language. Don't worry about this critical thinking, but I've kind of come to think of it that it is yes, and it's because of the language. It's exactly the point you made in the middle. It's because it generates so much more language and it generates so much more discussion that's where its power is, I think. That those kinds of tasks, it's communication focused, it's language focused, it's student focused, but above all it's this divergent idea. That it's not just going through, here's a list of 10 words, memorise them, remember them for the next test them on the meaning. It's actually about how you use the language and put it into practice. But of course that is my opinion. Okay. So, should you use a course book to do it? Well, that's entirely up to you. There are good ones available if you so wish. And that's it. I think I'm done. Yeah. Thank you very much. Just as my last sales pitch, we do have a summer school, and we run a website which has various kind of little texts, and we do this word of the day. It's not word of the day these days, it's probably twice a week, once a week. Twice a week. But if you're interested, could you leave your name on our, and we can add you to our list, our website list. Don't feel obliged to fill it in, but if you would like to. And thank you very much for inviting me and for being so nice.
Just to say a few things. First of all, thank you from the CEP to Andrew for coming today. Thank you to you for coming. I'm sorry I missed the beginning. My director, I had to go and speak to him quickly, some problems. Does anybody have any questions for Andrew?
I have about the lexical lab. Is this a physical camp, like, or
basically
a physical course? Like,
yeah, so we run, basically it's a summer school in London. We run it for 6 weeks.
So this is in London? It's London.
Yeah, and it's, if you're available for Erasmus funding if you have access to that.
Okay.
They're basically 2 or 1 week courses. So we run a 2-week methodology course called Teaching Lexically, which is based a bit on our book. We do one on better testing and assessments, which is run by a friend of mine who's an expert in that. We run one on developing materials, a 1-week course. And then we have basically 2 language-based ones. So there's one which is advanced language and culture, which is more, a little bit more lecture-based. We go on little visits, talk about British culture, as well as learning about language. And then there's one which is basically just language. It's very much chatting, help you with the new language, learn a bit more, practice it again, that kind of approach. Yeah. It's all on our website, you'll find more details there.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Just to say, please remember that the inscripción is now open for the Congreso Regional. It's going to be about Plan Lingüístico del Centro.
Yes.
Some of what we've seen today is very much a part of the philosophy behind that. This common approach to teaching languages, how we need to change the way we work with languages. I mentioned ICLEI before. The foreign language departments, this type of approach is a fantastic way to start supporting your teachers who are teaching biology, science, music, anything really, these kind of critical skills. I was teaching geography and history for 12 years and I was doing a lot of this in my geography class. It would have been lovely if the English department had tried to do some of that as well. But please remember that the Congreso de Regional is open. You have to ask your equipo directivo. They're the ones that have to say you yes, you no. Okay, but please try and convince them if you're interested. It should be an interesting Congreso this year. I don't know if Kathy wants to say anything about the resources here. We've got the resources here. The library is going to be open for some time yet, so please take your time and have a look. Kathy, do you want to say something about the resources?
Absolutely, yeah, thanks. And yes, if you can come and take a look, grab a catalogue if you're interested, have an Easter egg. Easter, happy Easter. Yeah, I'm your local National Geographic Learning representative for the north of Spain, so if I can help any of you with any issues of material, then please just come and have a chat. And thank you very much for your time. Thanks to Andrew and Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody wants to sign around? Anybody wants to sign around?
Paper to sign
Yeah,
first.
it's a really good webpage.
The lab, summer lab.
Yeah.